as promised, it is now in fact time to kick off with the panel debates. And a little bit later, Chris Burns will be asking how we can transform the norm when it comes to nature, get nature positive by 2030. But now it's time to look at how we can transform the norm when it comes to the climate, how real 1.5 transition plans can look in reality. Because we can all agree, the outcome of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh was disappointing. And the next COP28 meeting will be taking place in Dubai, an oil state. So for more, we can say hello now to our panelists. So I'd like to invite up on stage Eric Ronalda, the CEO of Signify, Magali Anderson, Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at Holcim. You can come up here beside me. Jose Manuel Entrecanales, CEO of Acciona, Verena Ross, the Chair of ESMA, and Rui Moreira, the Mayor of Porto. A round of applause for our panelists. Are you all a little bit spooked after what Max has just said? Or is it can we really get there? We can get there?
Obviously.
If you're not too spooked? Okay, well, it's certainly going to be a very busy time for everyone involved. Verena Ross, I would like to start with you. Welcome, lovely to see you. Because we'd like to start with one point that Max already mentioned, and that is, of course, greenwashing. You're a markets regulator, and there's a new EU law that we discussed, and it's meant to tackle this greenwashing, as apparently 50% of green claims, they're just not true at all. So tell us why this just won't fly anymore in the future.
Thank you very much, and first of all, congratulations, and wonderful to be here today. Certainly, we have put, as a European Securities and Markets Regulator, on our kind of aim and roadmap for supporting the sustainable transition, one of the core aspects here that we're talking about, and that is transparency. Because it is really about making sure that there is transparency of the companies presenting what they can do. There is transparency of those financial services firms that are marketing products as being green and sustainable. And there's the transparency for the end investor who can actually make informed choices about how to make sure that they can realize their sustainability goals in their financial investments. So that is one of the areas that we have focused on. And obviously the flip side of transparency is to avoid greenwashing. And so we've done some work. We have actually launched a consultation on what does greenwashing actually mean. What does it mean to all of you? What is the phenomena? How much do you see of it happening? And we want to really get good evidence together with our sister authorities on the banking and insurance side to get a better feel of how big is this problem and how can we try to resolve it through providing the right regulatory framework, supporting good and clear, transparent information on which investors can actually make informed choices.
Okay, Verena Ross there reminding us it's all about transparency. Let's bring in now Magali Anderson from Holcim, cement company, of course. And you're believed the first cement company with a science-based net zero target. That's a 95% emissions cut in one of the most carbon-intensive industries. So what still needs to transform, do you think, to make cement, and or in how you make cement, and are you on track to meet those goals?
No, I'm joking. Of course we are. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be here. Extremely proud as well to be with this panel, but after what Max just said on the importance of disclosure. When we went for our first net zero pledge, which happened 2 years ago, we only did it once we could have our target validated by SBTi. Both, at that time it was 2030, that's all that existed. And then later, when SBTi came up with their first net zero validation, we got our short-term and long-term target, or our 2030 or 2050 targets validated for the 3 scopes. And that for us was extremely important. For me to go out with a net zero pledge without having intermediate targets validated by an organization like SBTi would have been greenwashing, in my opinion. And something I'm extremely proud of with the team is that 2 years after that pledge, no one has actually accused us of greenwashing. And you know, our sector is not necessarily one that everyone looks at with positive eyes. So I'm sure some people did try. So I think transparency and disclosure is absolutely key to show we're on track. So what we actually did, in addition to having our SBTi target, is, as Max mentioned earlier, our CEO and myself and a bunch of people in our company do have a part of their bonus system associated with our sustainability results. And it will be the first time this year, so I get a lot of pressure from my CEO to make sure that he gets his bonus. But it really sends the right tone to the entire organization, independently of the bonus itself. It really tells our entire organization, this is important, this is what we need to do. So that's why we've been, not only we have gone for the 2030 target, we also have 2025 target and even shorter target linked to our bonus system. This year will be the first time. I'm not allowed to disclose it yet because our numbers are not official yet, but let's put it this way, my CEO has not been disappointed.
Okay, and I'm sure he is tuning in. He couldn't make it here, but I'm sure he's listening to every word. Thank you so much. That is the view there from Holcim. Now let's hear the view from Acciona and bring in José Manuel Entrecanales and ask you, what does construction look like in a fossil fuel-free world? And can you give us a practical example, perhaps?
Construction, it's an old business, old in the sense of ancient, and it has had great difficulties. Let's first define in evolving into that camp. However, we should define what we're referring to when we say construction. I would put it in the infrastructure development project concept. There has been a great deal of advance in defining the projects as calculating the impact on each of the projects from the very start and the solutions. Now, for example, we're going to build a big tunnel in Sydney, which is going to go under the Sydney Harbour. And the project initially was being thought to be built in a way which was very carbon emitting. So we proposed an alternative solution, which is faster, less carbon emitting. That kind of analysis is now becoming the norm, and that's what makes the projects different. The difficulties are, for example, in the availability of machinery that's electric. That's very difficult, and but that's where regulation comes in. We have cities in Europe that are not allowing anything other than electric machinery to work in their cities, like Oslo, for example. That is an essential part of the deal. Regulation. We need regulation to change that trend.
Regulation, okay. The view there from Acciona. Thank you so much. Let's bring in now Eric Ronalda from Signify. Good to see you. Your climate impact is mostly in the product use phase, so it makes sense that almost all your R&D budget is now for low carbon products. So the question is, looking to the future, what kind of transformative tech can we expect that would lower product emissions to near zero?
Good afternoon. We can talk about the future, but we can talk about the present, because the reality is that a lot of the technologies that can allow us to do big leaps are already existing. But we do lighting, so let me talk to you about lighting in a very pragmatic way. If you take incandescent technology, and let's say that it consumes 100, when we move to LED, this goes down to 6. So this is basically a technology that you have on top of your heads. We've been bringing to the market a few quarters ago a new LED technology which is going to save 40 to 50% of the existing LED technology. So we go basically from 6 to 3. Now, if you add connectivity, meaning that you only put light when you need light, you can reduce it by a further 50%, so now we go to 1.5. So it's technology innovation driven, and we go from 100 in terms of consumption to 1.5. It's not about the future, just about today.
It is about today, and we heard that message loud and clear, that it's urgent. Thank you so much for that. Let's bring in now our city, our mayor around the table there from Porto in Portugal, and talk to you about buildings, because half your city's emissions come from buildings. How will you work with the private sector to green city infrastructure and deliver the 2030 cuts?
Well, I'm very happy to be here. When we look at the goals of the city of Porto to be carbon neutral by 2030, we found out very fast that the emissions produced by us, by the municipality, are only about 6%. So we had to develop a scheme in which to attract, first of all, the public sector, and we are talking about public transport, so to involve the government in the transformation of the grid. Public transport is a must. We live in a country where 30% of the emissions are produced by individual transport, so we are doing that very steadily and now using the European funds, not only for 2 new underground lines, but also for 1 BRT or metro bus, whatever you want to call it, with green hydrogen produced in the city. So that's one thing. The second thing was how to involve the private investors. And what we have been doing basically is to look at the capacity the city has to produce electricity through photovoltaic production. And on the housing, what we are doing basically is to use tax incentive, which means if people are willing to invest in transformation of their housing needs in terms of energy, we will give them a tax benefit. So that's how we are really involving private units, private families, so which they can go and they can borrow. The government has organized financing for them to borrow in order to achieve the necessary money for the investment, which normally has a payback of something like 5 years. With a reduction of city taxes on property, we can reduce the payback to 3 years, and we think that's going to make the change. Another thing is, of course, to use our dwellings. We have 13% of the houses in the city of Porto are owned by the municipality. What we are doing is using the rooftops to produce electricity, which has a double advantage. First of all, from a social point of view, it will provide these families with cheap energy, and we are talking about deprived families. That's one thing. The second thing is, of course, to have energy communities which will be able to sell that energy to the neighbors ultimately.
Okay, we'll come back to you a little bit later, but let's now bring in Holcim again, because we've been reading your transition plans and it's showing that stakeholders, their financial plan is aligned with your target. So where are you investing 500 million a year, and how does this compare to non-green spending?
So yes, we do. We issued our first climate report last year, and we put it to the vote of our shareholders, and we got nearly 90% approval. So that was quite a great success, showing the support, and we are putting it again to the vote this year because we just want to see if they have changed their mind since. But that, of course, includes a great deal of transparency, because when you do a climate report, you really follow TCFD recommendation, which for Swiss company will become compulsory in a couple of years. So we're just slightly ahead of our time. But to answer your question on CapEx, so the 500 million CapEx is actually the target for 2025. Last year we were over 300 million green CapEx, and this year even more, but not public yet, sorry. So that our total CapEx for the company is about 1.4 billion. So we are spending over a third of our CapEx on sustainability.
Okay. And back to Verena Ross there for the view from ESMA. Just back on that greenwashing point, we're wondering, will 2023 bring a reckoning, do you think, for environmental, social and governance investing? Is regulation finally biting and saying to investors, if you want to sell sustainable products, you can't do it by marketing, you need to change your portfolios?
So certainly we are in a transformation process, not only as companies and cities that are sitting around this table, but non-table, around this group, but also as regulators and supervisors. And the regulatory framework is changing fast. We have sustainability disclosure regulation already in force. We have a taxonomy regulation, but currently only for parts of the wider sustainability framework. We are clearly waiting to also see that now expanded to other parts outside of climate and to cater for the transition. So there's a lot of different parts of the puzzle which are coming together. And I think one of the core parts is clearly what Max also mentioned earlier, the corporate disclosure that will now come through the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the international ISSB standards, which will create a common underpinning of what companies need to report, and with that create that comparability of the different pieces of information. And that should help to embed the right data in the investment value chain to ensure that it goes from the original company to the financial services company, the asset manager who is packaging products together, and to the end investor. So this is a moving framework. We as ESMA are very conscious not everything is ideal and clear yet, as clear as it should be. It's an evolving process, but we are doing our utmost to try to help to provide that guidance and to also ensure consistent implementation of the regulatory framework as it comes through.
Okay, because business, of course, need clarity. They don't like confusing messages. You mentioned the taxonomy there, so I'd like to hear from Jose Manuel there, because Acciona reported to CDP that 90% of CapEx is aligned with the EU taxonomy's environmental objectives. So just tell us, how does your infrastructure and real estate business fit here? And where are you investing the most? And how are these projects actually sustainable?
Well, first of all, 75% of our investment is in renewable energy. So we're now the largest pure renewable energy utility in the world. So that takes up about this next year. These are all approximate figures, but next year we're going to invest about 3 billion, of which probably 2.5 will be in renewables. So that is automatically taxonomic. The construction activity is taxonomic because, as I was saying before, we do select all of our projects on a reduced on non-emission basis or minimum emission basis. The projects that we finance ourselves are carbon emission reduction projects. The real estate projects the housing projects we bring into the market have all the BREEAM and the seal of minimal reduction, so substituting. Then there is the offsetting part. So at the end of the day, you need to do SBTi offsetting, which of course we're doing. At the end of the day, it's this year I think we're going to be over 90%. I think we may actually be at 90 something. So yes, it's doable. It's doable.
Okay. I'd like to hear from yourself, Eric, on e-waste, because of course for a company like yours, e-waste is a major problem. It's not biodegradable and Europe's impact is huge. So what are you doing to address this?
So we're working at different levels, but the first thing we did, which I think we're very proud of, is zero waste to landfill for us as a company. You know, before you claim that you're not going to emit waste in whatever you sell, you have to make sure that you don't bring waste to landfill in whatever you do. So in the 140 locations and 70 big sites where we operate, we can say to that we have found a recycling route for all our wastes. Then on the offers, we're doing a lot of stuff, and it's actually quite cool. So first of all, we designing products more and more to be serviceable, meaning that they're modular. If you need to change something, you don't have to change everything, only the part which is at stake. We have been venturing in material and 3D printing, and we're the only one today in our industry which is doing this. We have something like 8 plants, all over the world, and this is quite cool because we can take polycarbonate, but we can also use fishnet, so we can use a compact disc. There are billions on the bloody planet, and there's absolutely nothing you can do with them. So we take them, and we can do components, and we can do full products, made of those. And what's exciting is, at the end of life, or at the end of the commercial life of these products, you can take them back, and you can reuse the raw material. So you would go, in the past, the raw material was maybe reused or used over a period of 15 years at best. Now we're talking about reusing it over a period of 80 years. Now we're venturing in something else which is not on the product but on the services, which we would like to see what we could do in order to reuse our product, because the commercial life is much shorter than the technical life. But that's a new service we're just venturing pretty excited, but it's small still.
Okay, we shall certainly keep an eye on that. Magali, just briefly there on lower emissions cement, because of course it's very expensive, no, compared to regular cement. So how will Holcim make low carbon element cement price competitive?
No, it's actually not that expensive to start with. I shouldn't say that having Acciona sitting next to me, but no, it's not that expensive because, for example, one of the ways to decarbonize our cement is to replace the fossil fuel by waste, which fossil fuel representing about 30% of our CO2. So when you do that, the cement plants that have now replaced 100%, when we had this crazy energy price last year, they were really quite happy. So I think it's more a question of deployment, of marketing, of talking to our value chain to explain why they should use it. But again, not only is not a big price increase at all, but in addition, concrete is about 5% of the total price of your building. So in any case, the impact is completely minimum. So when we launch EcoPact, our green concrete and or low carbon concrete, and I will define it because we do define it as there is no GHG gas protocol to explain what is low carbon concrete, is a concrete that is 30% less CO2 minimum, can go all the way to 70-80% than the norm of that country. We launched it 2 years ago. This year we have reached about 2022 about 13%, 14% sales. Imagine how many companies manage to launch one product that become 14% sales in less than 2 years. And that shows the appetite of the market, and that really shows that we can launch those low carbon products, and we can do it, as you were saying, we can do it now.
Mayor of Porto there, what you've been listening to so far, does it make sense? Any reaction?
Well, a lot of it makes sense. It makes sense to avoid greenwashing, and we all are faced with that impact. And we are totally aware of what the question of production is. The thing is, when we look at transition, we will need most likely more energy before we need less energy. And that's one of the issues we have with especially digital transition, a city that is attracting IT. And this is a very complicated thing for a city. When you want to make a transition, you can't tell people you have to consume less energy, because poor people, for instance, they are starved because they don't have the energy to heat their homes. So before you have a transition, you will need, first of all, to be able to have a higher production of energy which is produced in the city, which is green, and it's only then that you can tell them that maybe now you have to gain the advantage of reducing energy. So, and for someone who is in politics and who has to run the city, it's already very difficult to tell people to tell my mother leave your car at home is already a difficult task. But it's even more difficult when you told people, when we are changing 25% of our houses, we are really implementing measures to save energy. But what they tell me is, Mayor, look, first of all, we want to heat the houses during the summer. That's during the winter. That's the first thing we want. And no matter what the quality of insulation we provide, and we have been investing a lot in the last 10 years in insulation, these people basically, they are starved for energy. So when you look at the cities, and that's a big, believe me, a big issue on countries like ours, who, although they are not very, very cold, because we don't have very cold weather, we have very poor people. From the people who live in council houses, it's about 13% of our population lives in council houses, very good quality council houses by any standards, but only 25% have jobs, only 25% work. These people, when you tell them about energy, they will say, and you're going to produce on their rooftops, they want to acquire that energy, and they want to say, okay, it's nice because in winter my house will not be at 15 Celsius, I wanted it to be at 20. And that's the sort of compromise cities have to work on, also with, of course, with the industry and the business sector.
And we were here, of course, at the CDP Awards 2023, and Porto is one of the very few cities that's been a CDP A-list city for the last 3 years, I believe. So what benefits are the people of Porto seeing from this as you're jumping for this stronger climate action?
Well, when I read the Financial Times this morning and I saw that Porto has head off in FDI, we were #1 city. It shows that it's possible to do this effort and still to be competitive and attract business. And what we think, and we try to tell the people, is that the cities that will move faster will be the ones that will have an edge, an advantage in terms of attracting business on the one hand. And ultimately, it's also like it's a little bit the question of the dentist. If you go early to the dentist, it will hurt you less than if you go too late. And we will all have to go to the dentist in cities. And we have cities here, Vitoria-Gasteiz is here. We have been working with them and with lots of other cities. And we have this idea to tell people, look, if we move faster, if we are ahead, if we do it in the right time, it's like the dentist.
So prevention rather than cure, as opposed to always being in crisis mode.
Sorry
which we're
about
used to.
if there are any dentists here. I have nothing against dentists.
So just a question for the companies then around the virtual table. Jose, perhaps we start with you. What about the capital markets? How do they view your plans? And do you have any loans set up that are tied to delivering on your climate transition?
Yes, we have a lot. We have about 5 billion issued under green standards. The question there is, how do you improve the risk-return balance, the equation? That's the secret, one of the secrets to this. I mean, there's people who are going to change your companies, and the companies in the corporate ecosystem. There's going to be corporation, like probably all of us, who do it because of conviction. Then there are going to be ones that only do it because if it's a higher return proposition, and then there's going to be the ones that don't want to do it, don't want to make the transition. Those have to be affected by regulation. The second portion, of course, there's overlapping on all of the second portion, the ones that will move by aspiring to make a better return, which is a very honest decision to make in a company. In fact, you should be looking into that permanently. Your financing and the fact that green financing is a more competitive financing, and the better terms at which you will be able to get it, and the better reception from capital markets and so on and so forth, are elements that are key to promoting that transition.
Okay. And yourself, Eric?
Well, we restructured our debt before the funds were available. But we're going to have to restructure it next, and I think we will access to green funds. At the end of the day, if we look at our shareholder base, probably 50% of the shareholder base is in our stock because they're very sustainability focused. Now I have also to say that I would like to get many more questions about sustainability whenever I meet them. So, it's starting, but it's not there yet.
It's not there yet. And what about Holcim?
Yes, we did our first sustainability-linked bond back in 2021. Was the first one in our sector, and was 850 million. Got great oversubscription, great rating, and the bond, the way it worked is that we basically committed, linked it to our 2030 CO2 target. So if we don't reach it, it's going to cost us money, which was a way for us to say we don't just make targets just to please CDP, we also put our money on the table. If it doesn't work, we won't have it. So we have about 3 billion of green financing. We have a target of 40% of our financing to be green by 2025. And lastly, last year we did the first Swiss one for 425 million, and we were awarded just a couple of weeks ago for the best Swiss francs bond award by the IFR. So that's pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And let's get the view from ESMA there, from Verena Ross, on how you can help. Because, of course, the SDV, or the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, is mandatory now, as of January. So funds must be classified according to sustainability.
So, indeed, the SFDR actually already came into force a year and a half ago, but the detailed templates became mandatory in January. There is quite a lot of learning curve to do for the financial services firms that have to disclose under that, either the companies themselves or actually the products that they market. And there have been significant issues in making sure that this pure disclosure regulation isn't abused as a marketing or labeling categorization, because it is about disclosure, which means that it doesn't necessarily mean if you are disclosing under SFDR that means you are necessarily particularly environmentally friendly. And what we've seen in particular is that some of the funds have used the opportunity that now that there is, with investors being very keen to invest in products that actually are ESG sustainable and support that transition. There's been a lot of marketing going on with labels that didn't really reflect what was in the underlying portfolio. And so this is something that we are very much focused on the one hand in the disclosure practices, and on the other hand we are also currently consulting on whether there should actually be some guidance around naming of funds, so that you can only use these type of labels of ESG sustainable when you really have also that characteristic in the portfolio that you are marketing.
Okay, very interesting times indeed. Now we're almost out of time, but I just have one last question for our panel. If you can speak a little bit from the heart. I mean, we mentioned COP27 being very disappointing. We spoke about COP28, which will take place in Dubai. It'll be chaired by a fossil fuel boss. So is our system really capable of transformation? And do you personally feel there's a missing link for genuine global progress? Who'd like to start? You look like you're frowning.
No, just scratching. But
Let's start with Halsey.
Can I speak about the COP15 instead?
No, because I'll leave that to Chris Burns
Yeah.
in just a minute.
No, I agree. I was actually, the reason I'm saying that is because I was at both COPs, and COP15 was way more encouraging than COP27. There's few things that we shouldn't ignore that happen, and when we talk about disclosure, there was from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of UN, who came out with this new standard to stop net zero empty promises, which I think is pretty interesting for companies, or to look at how it is. But I think there's the moment, we need to stop finger pointing to everyone else. Companies need to stop saying we need the legal framework to move, legal framework to say we need the companies to move. We just don't have time. So we all need to move together. And the choice we made in Holcim is say we move, and hopefully that we pass on the right messages to the government,
Okay.
and that would help creating that movement.
Okay, it's time to move. Not time to talk. Eric, briefly from you.
Yeah, so we like doing. So basically, we have every 5-year sustainability plan. We call that Brighter Lives, Better World. It's far beyond climate change. And at the end of 2020, we reached carbon neutrality, Scope 1, Scope 2, and a bit of Scope 3. It was a 11-year journey. And now the new target is to reach the Paris Agreement target, according to science-based targets, but not in 2030, in 2025, taking as a baseline 2019, opening to the full Scope 3, which is 90% of our full emissions. So at the end of the day, that's what we do. You ask us to be honest, so I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to COPs anymore. I've done it, and it was not driving the right level of energy for me, so I'm not going anymore.
Okay, I see. José Manuel?
well, I'm going to leave with an optimistic view here. I have been personally at it since 1994, when I inaugurated my first wind plant. And I've been seeing, I wasn't CEO then, but I was kind of moving. I've been seeing the curve go this way, very flat, very, very slow growth. I think we're reaching the vertical side of the S-curve. I think things are going this way. And so there is going to be a change in speed of change, a great increase, multiplication of the speed of change in the next few years. And I could go on about which are the factors most affecting, but I think we don't have time. Let's leave it there. There are very clear signs that the S-curve is starting to very quickly pick up onto the verticality.
Okay, so it's a real paradigm shift. The view from Esma?
I think if I look back to COP last year, for me, one of the most important things there from a financial sector point of view was the work of the International Sustainability Standards Board and the fact that you actually now have global sustainability reporting standards. And if you talk about transparency, disclosure, that is so essential to have something that is genuinely creating some comparability across the globe. So I'm glass half full. Hopefully that will be adopted globally as a standard and will help all of us to move forward. And I think it has to be genuinely a joint effort between the private sector and the public sector. We don't have time to sit back and let this gradually happen. We need to move together and learn together. And it's a steep learning curve for all of us, but I hope we can continue on the road that we are.
Okay, and the final word there with the Mayor of Porto.
Well, I'm not as optimistic because I think we have been concentrating on tackling the problem from the supply side and not from the demand side. And the big changes in the world have been done through the demand side. If I stayed at the Boulevard Saint-Germain overnight, and when I looked at the cost of a croissant and the cost of a T-shirt produced in Indonesia, the croissant produced locally is more expensive. Why? Because the public is still not aware, and there is no indication of awareness of what the impact of everything that he consumes or that she consumes has on the environment. We buy a bottle, we take a bottle, and there is here probably the big description of what the contents are. But we don't know how much does it cost in terms of our planet, in terms of our resources that are not renewable. And I think that effort has not been made. We have, again, been concentrating on tackling the things always from the supply side. But when you look at the big changes, and the Portuguese were involved in some of the big changes with globalization, it was always demand that changed it. So I think COP is very disappointing in those terms. It doesn't concentrate on the demand side.
Okay, Rima Moreira, thank you so much for that. And also to Verena Ross, to Jose Manuel Entre Canales, to Magali Anderson, and also to Eric Rondela. I wish you a wonderful day here at the Louis Vuitton. I hope you enjoy the visit as well later and get to mingle and network with everyone in the room. A round of applause for our panel.